My name is Dominique El-Shabini and I have been teaching for 6 years. I've trained in London at the Institute of Education and I'm talking to you today about how to teach English using the United Kingdom or the UK system approach. My aims of this session are to introduce the English National Curriculum and explain the documentation we would use to plan an English lesson. The National Curriculum is a very important document. The next thing I will be doing is explaining how teachers from the UK would plan an English lesson for a Year 3 class. They would be 6 to 7 or 7 to 8 years old in the UK. Then I will be explaining how to teach an English lesson and explain what lesson and the resources might look like. And then lastly, I'll be teaching you how to assess children using the UK system and approach, and we'll be tracking children's progress. So, key terms. The most important words that you need to know from this presentation are planning, instruction or teaching, and assessment. All of these things mean that children will be able to learn effectively. Planning means what we do to a lesson to prepare for it. Teaching means the delivery of the lesson, and assessment might happen in the lesson, before the lesson, or after the lesson. All of these things enable students to learn effectively. So, in order to understand the UK teaching system, you must first understand what a school looks like. This is what a school would look like. You would have key stages, and in those key stages, you have early years foundation stage, you have key stage 1, and you have key stage 2. Nursery and reception make up early years. Years 1 and 2 make up key stage 1, and years 3, 4, 5 and 6 make up key stage 2. It's really important to note that after each key stage, there is a national test. After key stage 1, the children in year 2 will complete something called a SATs test, and that is so the government can assess and track the progress that the children have made in the UK. Then, afterwards, in year 6, which is in key stage 2, at the end of key stage 2, they also have a SATs test. These are really important tests for secondary schools as they then take this information up with them to then learn key stage 3 at secondary school, key stage 4 at secondary school and key stage 5 at secondary school. You'll notice that the ageing system is different. In the UK, we start 3 to 4 in nursery, and by the time they leave year 6, they're 10 to 11 years old. I'm going to be talking to you today first about planning, how to plan a lesson, so you know what the lesson looks like. All of our planning and all our resources and all our teaching materials and all our assessments come from this document here, the National Curriculum. This is a statutory piece of information that's created by the government and means that by law we have to follow it. We don't have a choice. Then the schools will create something called a school curriculum or a long-term plan. This is what the school uses to decide what children are going to learn in each subject across the school, and they map it so that the children know what they're learning and so what the teachers know what they're planning. Then we have something called a medium-term plan or a weekly plan, and this is created by the teacher. This is so they know what they're doing from week to week. Then there's the individual lesson plans. These lesson plans are for individual lessons like English or maths or science, and you don't have to use them, but lots of teachers do to help them teach the best lessons that they can. So, I'm going to begin with the National Curriculum. The National Curriculum is a document that you can find online, and it's accessible to anyone, anywhere in the world. We haven't got paper copies anymore because there's so much paper, we didn't want to waste it. So now you can go onto Google and just type in National Curriculum UK and it will come up. If you click on the first link, you can find it yourselves as well. In the National Curriculum, we cover statutory subjects. These are subjects that you have to teach. These are the National Curriculum subjects that you have to teach. English, maths, science, history, art and design, DT, geography, computing, music, PE, and ancient modern foreign languages. You'll find guidance of how to teach these subjects in the National Curriculum. And these are broken down into Key Stages 1 and Key Stages 2. You also have non-statutory subjects, which you don't have to teach. They're subjects like citizenship. So, I'm going to be talking to you about how to plan an English lesson, not any other lesson, not a maths, not a science, an English lesson. So let's get into the national curriculum for English. From years 1 to 6, they must have objectives that enable them to become fluent speakers. These objectives are the same for the children in year 1 as they are year 2, year 3, year 4 and 5 and 6. It's really important that children are able to speak fluently in every year group. It's the fundamental skill that you need to be a confident writer and a confident reader. If you are not able to speak clearly, you're not able to read. And if you're not able to speak clearly, you're not able to construct the sentences that you need to write. It's a vital skill to be able to say your sentence before you write it. Here are some of the objectives. Children should be able to listen and respond appropriately to adults and peers. Ask relevant questions to extend their knowledge and understanding. Use relevant strategies to build their vocabulary. Articulate and justify answers, arguments and opinions. Give well-structured descriptions, explanations and narratives for different purposes. Maintain attention and participate actively. Use spoken language to develop understanding through speculating, hypothesizing, imagining and exploring ideas. Also, speak audibly and fluently when increasing amount of command of the English language. Participate in discussions, presentations and performances like role play. Gain and monitor the interest of listeners. Consider and evaluate different viewpoints, attending to and building on the contributions of others. Select and use appropriate registers for effective communication. And really, effective communication is key. We want children to be able to feel confident to express themselves, not only with their adults and teachers, but with their friends. If they're not able to communicate, they're not able to feel comfortable, they're not able to feel like they're able to share their ideas in the classroom or at home. This is an extremely, extremely important point. So, again, focusing on English, this is how the document is organised. The national curriculum is a set of objectives that are broken down into Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. These are then broken down into Year 1 objectives, Year 2 objectives, and Year 3 and 4 objectives, and Year 5 and 6 objectives. I mentioned before that at the end of each key stage, there's something called a SATs test. That is the governmental test to make sure that they know how children are progressing in each school, and every child must take this test unless they have extenuating circumstances. This means something that they really can't take the test and the government has approved it. Year 6, as I said before, take a SATs test, and this information then goes on to their secondary school. So, English objectives. I mentioned before how in Year 3, if we're focusing on Year 3 for this session, have spoken language objectives that are the same from Years 1 all the way through to Year 6. Then they have something called reading objectives and writing objectives. Reading objectives are then broken down again into word reading and comprehension. Word reading is the ability to decode a word and break it down to know what it says. Comprehension is also a really important skill, and it's not about what the word is, or it's not about reading the word, but understanding what the word means. A child could be a really fluent reader, but not have any idea of what the words mean. Or the children might have a really good comprehension of the story and they might be able to understand the pictures and gain meaning from the story, but they might not be able to read all the words. We don't want children to just be good at one of these things. We need them to be good at both. To be a good reader, you must be able to word read, know what the words are, and understand them. So that's why there is an equal amount of importance placed on both areas. Then we go to writing. Writing is about transcription, handwriting, and the ability to put pen to paper. Then we've got composition. Composition is drafting your writing, what the content of it is, what it would look like on the page, what the story is about, or what the non-chronological report that they have written is about. Then we focus on vocabulary, spelling, and grammar. That's making sure that they actually make sense and actually know how to spell the words. Again, like before, children can be better at one of these things, but we need children to be good at all of these qualities, all of these skills, for them to be able to become successful and amazing writers. transcription, composition, vocabulary and spelling, each child will always have a different strength. Some children are very good spellers. They will just see a word and remember it. Some children have loads of amazing ideas and write a really interesting story. Some children have terrible handwriting, but they have amazing composition. Again, we need them to be good at everything, and teachers are there to support children in learning each of these skills. This is how the English curriculum is broken down. So, I'm now going to talk to you about progression. So if we focus on one of these areas, such as writing and transcription, Year 1 objectives are different from Year 3 and 4 objectives, and Year 3 and 4 objectives are different from Year 5 and 6 objectives. It's really important that children don't learn the same objectives each year. It's really important that they learn to increase their skills and build upon what they know and make sure that they are becoming very confident writers. And we can see here how the skills are getting harder or with increased difficulty. So if we look at Year 1, we have pupils that are being taught to sit properly at a table, holding a pencil comfortably and correctly. Sometimes children in Year 1 that have just come from nursery and reception can't sit down. And so it's a really important skill to be a really good writer, is to be able to sit on a chair. Then we've got begin to form lowercase letters in the correct direction, starting and finishing on the same line in the right place. Form capital letters, form the digits from 0 to 9, understand which letters belong to which handwriting families. Often when they come from reception, children have only learnt pencil grip or the basic letter formations. By the end of Year 1, we need them to be able to know how to write each letter so that they are able to write words, stories, and other types of writing, other forms of writing. When we get to Years 3 and 4, you can see that the objectives change. They are progressing, they're building on their knowledge each year. You can see by Year 3 and 4, they use diagonal and horizontal strokes that are needed to join letters and understand which letters are adjacent to one another and are left best unjoined. So in the UK, children learned by just forming the individual letters like A, B, and actually forming them with a pencil. But by the time they get to Year 2, 3 and 4, they shouldn't be just writing the letters, they should be using something called cursive handwriting. That's when they join their letters. It's really important that they learn this, otherwise they don't meet the government objectives. If children don't fulfil the objectives, they're not able to meet the government's criteria. This is what the government says, so as teachers, we have to follow it. Then Year 3 and 4 can progress again. We build on their knowledge, and if we look here, they go from joining their letters with increased legibility and consistency to then writing legibly, fluently, and with increasing speed. In Year 1, children don't write very much because they're often focused on actually just forming the letters. But by Year 6, they know the letters, and they also know how to join them. So we expect by Years 5 and 6 for children not to be focusing on knowing how to spell the letter or write the letter, but writing fluently, quickly, and so they can get their ideas down confidently. Because by the time they leave primary school and they go to secondary school, this is a skill that they have to have understood. If they don't have this skill, they will struggle in secondary school. So it's our job as a primary school teacher to make sure that they have these fundamental skills in order for them to learn in the next years of their school lives. So now we're moving on to the school curriculum. The school curriculum takes the objectives from the national curriculum and then places them into a long-term plan. You can see here this key skills of spoken language, reading and writing. All those things I talked about before have to be thought carefully and planned by the school of where they're going to be taught in the school year. So our school have broken down our school reading, our long-term plan, into narrative, into non-fiction and into poetry. All these areas give teachers the opportunity to have spoken language, to have reading, to have writing. We don't have to teach spoken language, just spoken language with narrative. We can do a bit of everything. We don't have to just teach reading with non-fiction. Naturally, spoken language, reading and writing will all come into non-fiction. And poetry, again, we can use all of those key skills that we need them to be able to do within different subjects. And so we have then focused again on specific types of literature to expose children to lots of different kinds of writing. We don't want children just to be able to write instructions. We don't want children to just write stories. We want them to learn all the different types of writing there is out there. There are so many. And so the school has decided that using these curriculum points, they're going to study stories by the same author, they're going to study adventure and mystery stories, they're going to study traditional tales or alternative version of fairy tales, they're going to study non-fiction, recount text, instruction text, explanation text, non-chronological reports, persuasion and persuasive writing, poetry. Michael Rosen is a very famous author in the UK that children love. He's a very, very funny poet. Humorous poems, performance poetry, structured poems with limericks, and Take One Poet by Roger Stevens, which is a focus, a poet study where they learn about one particular poet. So you can see, thereby the school has taken the objectives from the national curriculum and planned an exciting and fantastic coverage of different types of literature that children can learn. You can see underneath by the subject is how many weeks they have to spend on that subject. That's so teachers know how long they have to plan that area of work for. And this one is 4 weeks, but some weeks are shorter and only have 1 week. This is because to write a story or study a story by the same author would take a longer time than to look at one short poem. So a teacher has to really think carefully about where they're planning and how long each unit of work is taking. At the moment, we're studying adventure and mystery stories because we're in the spring term. We also break this table down into autumn, spring, and summer. That's so that we know exactly what we're teaching in each season. As well, you can see we have points here. It says final written outcome. That's really important for assessment. I mentioned before that a teacher's job is to plan, teach, and assess. Here, if we have a final written outcome, there the teacher is able to assess how their skills are doing, how their spoken language skills are doing, how their reading skills are doing, how their writing skills are doing. With a final written outcome, all these skills are needed for that final written piece. So when where children are studying stories by the same author, they might read the familiar story, and then they might do some drama to understand it, and then they would finally break down the structure and they would use a familiar story as a model to write a new story. So they would use the structure of the story they know to create a new story. Then here, the final written outcome for recount text is, if we're in non-fiction, a recount text is where you write about a past event and like a diary, or in this case, the final written outcome would be a newspaper article or a sports article, and including detail and expressed in ways that engage the reader and viewer. So for each of these topics, there is a written outcome, so we know how they're doing with their writing. But as I said before, to be a good writer, you need to be a good reader and you need to be a fluent speaker. Currently, and today, I'm going to show you how to plan a lesson that uses adventure and mystery stories. And their final written outcome at the end of this module of work, which is 4 weeks long, will be to write an adventure story focusing on plot. So here I've circled adventure and mystery stories, and I've captured a bit of the national curriculum objectives which focus on the composition of writing. Before, you can see it says focusing on plot. Therefore, I need to, as a teacher, think about, what am I teaching? What do I want my students to learn? If I'm focusing on plot, then I'm focusing this term on their writing. And so, using this subject, I'm going to cover these objectives of the national curriculum. Pupils should be taught to discuss writing similar to which they are planning to write in order to understand and learn from its structure, vocabulary and grammar. discussing and recording ideas. During this module, I will give my students opportunities to plan their writing. During studying adventure and mystery stories, I will give them opportunities to draft and write, making sure that children know that they don't just have to write a story and that's their final outcome. Drafting means practicing, going over things, making sure that they are able to edit. A writer never just writes something and that's the final piece. And even famous writers spend a long time redrafting and working on their story or working on their text until they get the final outcome. Then we've got to make sure, as a teacher, I make sure there's time for evaluation and editing. Again, like editors in a newspaper or children or adults that write novels, there is never just the finished article straight away. You always give time for evaluation and editing. So they might write their story, but as the teacher, I will give them time to edit it. And then lastly, proofreading and reading aloud their own writing to their groups or a whole class. So as a teacher, I know that I need to give opportunities to the children in my classroom to read out their story. Again, that's linked to spoken language, that's linked to reading, and that's linked to writing. All those three areas sometimes cross over, but in this case, these skills are what we need to know and what we need to focus on. Adventure and mystery stories. Here we go. 4 weeks we're going to spend on that. And I've also got to focus as a teacher on these objectives. I'm not going to read them all out. You can have a look at them.